Hi there, I'm John Michael Garapi and this is Popcorn Roulette. Each episode I ask a friend to come on the show, they suggest a movie, we get together, we talk about it. Today's episode I have with me Mr. Joseph Rousseau. Joe, what's your name? What do you do? What's the thing you do?
I guess my name is Joe. I do not work all day in a button factory.
Joe, I gave everybody one question I would always ask them. It's what do you do? This is something you should be able to respond to.
I'm a graphic designer.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So specifically, we're talking today about Little Prince, the 2015 version. You're at least somewhat invested in this. What do you do? Give us a little bit more about the type of graphic design you do.
So it's a mix of everything. Web graphics, motion graphics, managing files for things. I don't know. That's
you specifically
really
work with a game company.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I've been working in the game industry for the past 6 years. Worked on Dungeons and Dragons things, Lord of the Rings things, Batman things, and then the latest two properties I've worked with have been Star Trek and The Walking Dead.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Today's movie, we're going to be talking about, I have to look at my notes for today's movie. Today's movie, we're going to be talking about The Little Prince, 2015, based upon the book by Antoine de Saint-Expurey, starring Mackenzie Foy, Jeff Bridges, and Rachel McAdams. Did an excellent job. Before we actually talk about the movie, we have to eat popcorn with Raisinets in it specifically.
Wait, they go in the popcorn?
They go in the pop. This was your idea, Joe. You read nothing of my email that I sent out to you.
I just don't read what I typed to you.
Oh, okay, I see.
Well, this is something
we're going to have to end up setting The Little Prince the book down here.
This is something I used to do, like putting like chocolate and stuff in the popcorn and it would like melt a little bit. It would be a huge mess, but it's not, I don't know. It's interesting, like salty sweet. Like,
yeah. Mm. I used to do the same thing when I worked at the movie theaters, except it was Reese's Pieces.
That's smarter, because like Raisinets are like, so like they take something that people like, chocolate, and then they add raisins to it. And then people don't normally like raisins. And then they have raisins, which are a healthy thing, and they ruin that by being healthy by adding chocolate.
So you're saying intentionally add something that's bad right up front to it.
Yeah, it's
Don't people think of raisins as being good for you, though?
Well, that's what I'm saying, and then you ruin it as a healthy snack by adding chocolate.
Right.
So it's foiled by both ends.
As opposed to peanut butter, which nobody actually thinks is good for you.
Exactly. You're, at that point, you're committed to the unhealthiness that is candy, right? Whereas this is like a half step in that sort of, space.
Delicious. Unfortunately, we have to move forward. I'm quite sure after the shoot, we'll just be sitting here going,
handfuls, yep.
This movie is The Little Prince. It's not The Little Prince.
It is, though.
But it isn't.
I don't know.
But it is.
Well, so the structure of this, The Little Prince, the story, is featured as an element of this story, which the frame around it is a completely different story. There's a young girl who is trying to get into this, like, very prestigious school, and they have to move her to a neighborhood because she flubs the test to get in via whatever standards or something. So they move her close to the school, so the school has to take her. And that's where she meets this aviator character, which is a character from The Little Prince.
The narrator of The Little Prince.
Yep. He basically kind of shows her how to be a kid because her life is so regimented and so strict. So, as soon as they move to this new neighborhood, the mother makes her life plan. And it's this crazy chart of magnets that says at 5 minutes to 8, we're getting up and we're doing this and so on and so forth. So every minute of her day is scheduled because she needs to get back on track and make sure that she's prepared for this school. Anyway, so that's the story, but in that story, the aviator introduces her to The Little Prince, which is a sort of scrawling and sort of like mixed together pictures that he's putting together.
Because we get the impression that the old man is actually the aviator from The Little Prince, that it's been 40 years and now he's presenting like this scribbling writing of like the time he spent with the Little Prince and this little girl.
Yeah, and then so that story is a core element, and in fact I believe pretty much everything is covered from The Little Prince as far as the content goes.
Yeah.
They cut out a couple things.
Some of it's off camera. For The Little Prince, it gets explained in the end as opposed to actually shown is the idea.
Yeah, they do cut some stuff and there's some liberties taken, and then the third act of the movie is a sort of mixing of the worlds,
Yeah.
where she goes off on her own adventure and sort of finds the little prince all grown up and out of touch, and he forgot how to be a kid or what it meant to be a kid.
Yeah.
And then she brings him back basically into the fold, and it's really touching. It's beautiful. It's sad. It's something that I wasn't expecting to have an emotional reaction to, because I remember reading the book as a kid, and
Did you cry?
yes, I watched it 3 times, and each time
I'll be 4 times in one showing. I almost cried. I
Yeah.
didn't actually cry. I can't say that much, but it hit me 4 times, and that's crazy. It's supposed to be like once, and you're just like, oh, the irony! It all comes together right here. But there's so many scenes where like we're watching. Here's the thing. Mark Osborne specifically said, the director of this movie, that this movie is a movie about maturity. Like, can you see that? Because he's the aviator's trying to teach this little girl how to be a little girl, but Osborne says it's a movie about growing up.
So I can see that. I guess for me, the way I looked at it was she actually was missing a fundamental life skill that the aviator is actually teaching her. So like in that first scene, she's waiting in line and her mom's going over, this is the answer to this question. This is the question they're going to ask you. This is the answer. And then they ask her a different question, and she just starts saying the answer to the question she was expecting as opposed to the question she got. She had no manner of critical thinking or improvisation or anything else. She wasn't thinking about what the question was. She was just ready to spill out the prepared answer, memorization, which is also helpful for other parts of education and growing up and stuff. But I feel like that aspect of it, like with her experience with the aviator, I feel like afterwards, if she were in that same scenario, she'd be like, oh, what was the question again? Oh, okay, this is my answer to it, as opposed to spilling out the stuff that she was hammered into her head over and over again. So I feel like I definitely see that, and I guess one of my questions was like, what was he trying to get at? Because they get at essential. What is essential?
Yeah.
And that's everywhere, and that comes back to the forefront with the third act. I don't know. I guess for that part, I was struggling with after going back and rereading the book. It felt like it was a lot. Like he was taking a message that he took from The Little Prince and making it his own, which is its own film. So that's fine. But it wasn't the message that I got after rereading The Little Prince, I guess.
Interesting. So you reread The Little Prince after this movie?
So I watched the movie.
Yeah.
And then I watched the movie again. Then I reread The Little Prince and went through and sort of like tried to like compare and contrast and kind of thing. But to me, I feel like the point of The Little Prince in a lot of places is there is no point. There is no meaning. There's no, or the meaning is self-defined in a lot of ways. And in the case of the movie, it's pretty clear cut that this is what he's trying to say. Do
you think this might be one of the reasons why we haven't really gotten a feature film out of The Little Prince before? We've had many attempts to remake The Little Prince. We were just talking about this before we actually got on the show. It's like the Japanese had an anime on this. The Russians attempt to do something along the lines. I say the Russians, specifically a Russian director. I just don't know his name. And then there's been other versions, but they've all been like short, made-for-TV, 20-minute affairs where they kind of just moved through the plot and didn't attempt to actually get into the depth of the book.
Well, I think that's at the surface, if you just play through the events that happen in the book, that's its own experiment. Like, it doesn't fit in a feature movie. Yeah. There is no second act. There's just the Little Prince going through these things saying, wow, grown-ups are really absurd over and over again. And instead of showing us, you know what I mean? Like it's about you interpreting his experience with seeing all these planets and how grown-ups act and stuff, and how you basically have to take from that being like, well, the Little Prince is also not seeing it from the adult's perspective as well.
Would it be fair to say like that the Little Prince is in a sense a book of poetry, that it isn't actually a story?
Bit. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
With very poignant refrain of, sometimes things in life are absurd, and it's good to recognize that and be like, I'm not going to do that thing, even though that's what an adult does, because that's silly.
Yeah.
Right? And that's kind of what ends up happening. But I feel like in the movie, it comes back to a point where you're like, this is real, this is important, like this is this is what's essential, like understanding this relationship. And the way they handled the old man goes through, his life is in danger. And that's, that part gets you. It's funny because comparing it to another recent children's movie, Moana, like we were watching it, my wife and I, and she was just like, oh no, and like the grandmother's gonna die. Like it's pretty evident by just, you know, the way they're telling the story that the grandma is going on to become like her spiritual sort of guide in this case. But she's just like, it's so not, for me, knowing it's going to happen makes it easier to accept. Yeah. Whereas like when it happened on the thing, I was just like, no, like you can't do it like this.
It's made even more tragic because it's like, it's obvious the little girl doesn't understand death.
Yes.
And like she sees it as being the aviator is going to go away someday.
Which is how he talks
Which is the
about
way he's explaining it, kind of trying to transition for her, and she does not want that. And it's such a great scene, just built correctly to have two characters with their dynamics coming at each other and trying to explain what they want and failing to get what they want at the same exact time.
And the scene where it comes to a head, there's a point where she goes to the aviator, basically packing her bags. She's going to run away. She's like, we're going to get in your plane and drive away and stuff. And the aviator's like, no, I can't see you anymore. I messed up. And you know what? Actually, it's time we get to the end where it sort of talks about like, and this is straight from the book, but the empty shell and like the snake that bites basically kills the little prince or sends him home or whatever, and it's how you choose to perceive that.
It's such a strange ending to what, in theory, is a children's book. It isn't a children's book, The Little Prince. It is at the same exact time to some extent, but it's really a book for adults about childhood. And in some sense, I don't know, how do you feel about The Little Prince itself?
It's hard for me to...
You're going to give this to, let's say your nieces and nephews are older in general. Like, at what age do you think that this is an appropriate book to give a niece or a nephew?
Oh my God. I don't know. Like, I don't know.
Because it also is also the type of book you would want to give one of your nieces and nephews one day.
Well, I mean, it's pretty word heavy. So, I mean, they have to be, I'd say 6 or 7 as far as the reading, comprehension alone. But I wouldn't be unwilling to read a book like this to them now, and they're 4 and 5. So.
But not leaving it to them and having to like face the end of The Little Prince alone without a conversation of thing.
I didn't think of it that way, but yeah, no, I guess I don't know. That's a tough one. That's a good question. I don't know. I would have to negotiate that with my brother and my sister-in-law.
Moving back, you mentioned the word essential twice because that pops up in The Little Prince, it pops up in the movie. The full quote is that which is essential is invisible. How do you think Osborne actually treated that concept in his book? Because in interviews with him, you see him repeat this himself, but he has a very visual medium to work with. So how does he make something invisible in that medium?
Well, I think he does the opposite. He doesn't make it invisible.
Yeah.
So his take on the sort of essentialness is from the perspective of the adults in this story. They're serious to the point of absurdity, whereas I feel like in the book, the absurdity was the man that wanted admiration. Like, he was just absurd. He was absurd. Whereas everyone was serious to the point of absurd, as far as the adults and the school and the presentation of them in the third act with, you know, this is the business and this is what we do to make things essential and stuff. But I feel like as far as the point of understanding and putting not just your belief, but how you choose to look at things, I feel like that was what I took away as far as the essential skill and, not life skill, but essential meaning as far as what you pull from these things. Like, you look at a star, and if that star is something you associate with me, then I'm always up there in that star, right?
Yeah.
So you can sort of redefine, whether it's through trinkets or memories you have with these people or whatever it might be, but defining those moments and those objects and giving them those I mean, we all have sentimental objects in our lives. And giving them that meaning.
The idea of because you spent time with it, therefore it's important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And not even just the time, but sort of connecting the two. So there's actually like a really cheesy commercial on the radio that I hear all the time where a father figure is giving his daughter a telescope. And he's like, oh, you know, if you ever need me, I'll be up in this. We'll meet at the moon. You know what I mean? And you know, like it became this thing as she grows up. It's like, oh, we'll meet at the moon. And it's like they're never gonna meet at the moon, and that's not what they're trying to say. But it's very related in the sense that, you know, she can look at the moon and think like, oh, what would my dad say to me at this place, or you know, like what's here? What can I pull on here? I can't talk to him right now, or maybe he died or something terrible. But the idea is you can pull on these things and use them to help you through, you know, whether it's tragic events or remembering good things, you know. So I feel like that's sort of what I got to as far as what the core of Essential was from the director's perspective, which again, I don't feel is part of the book at all.
It's like I don't have a problem with it either. You know what I mean? It's just
it's true.
It isn't the book. Yeah. Pulling back to some extent, because you work with computer graphics, and we didn't even talk about how the movie is presented, because it's all done in CGI at first, and then it switches to stop motion as soon as we hit The Little Prince, and it's incredibly magical. They could not have treated that book better by pulling back to an older art style that we rarely see, and it's very difficult and very complicated to do.
It's actually like 3D papercraft.
Yeah.
It's brilliantly done. Like
to the point where like you just see smoke moving, and it's all just made out of paper.
Yeah.
Like how, and I know good graphics is essential to making a movie actually work, but how essential is it? Like how important is it to have every single detail done right?
So this is actually my only problem with the movie. Is how this is handled at one point, because basically you have the story of the real world which the girl exists in, and that's traditional modern 3D animation a la Pixar, a la the new Disney movies and stuff. Then you have the second world where it's very clear when you're in it, this 3D-ish papercraft, stop motion, very, very tactile, very beautiful. And then in the third act, they mix them. It didn't bother me when she met the prince as an adult, or even seeing the ridiculous men like the businessman and I wish I could remember his name, the Hat Man, and the king.
Ricky Gervais.
Yes. And the king. It didn't bother me seeing them in 3D so much, and I think it might have been how they treated them while they were in that papercraft world.
Yeah.
But as soon as you saw the prince in the 3D real thing, I was like, what is that? That doesn't look right.
The hollowness of his eyes sort of
Everything was just wrong about that model.
I didn't actually think of him as being paper, but I think I thought of him as being wood. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I feel like that was the one space where, and it's only point out as not a mistake, but something I wouldn't have necessarily done, because everything else was so brilliant. Like it only sticks out there because everything else felt so seamless.
Yeah.
And that was the one space where it was highlighted to me. I was just like, ooh, I would have loved to see maybe the papercraft and her next to each other, or maybe seeing what she would look like in this world or something. Because you see the aviator, and I know he's an older man in modern 3D thing.
Right.
And he's a younger, so it's almost like a different character-ish.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the one space where you see them, and you mentally put them side by side. It's not something that it's actually done, but you immediately compare it to the scene you saw with the Little Prince before, and you're like, this is weird.
It's not really mentioned. There's a lot of things that aren't mentioned, like what year are we in? You actually can't figure that out?
Yeah, I figured it was
like, where are
the
we?
near future.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like technology is so crazy.
I was actually thinking we were in the 60s, to be honest with you. If you take a look at like everything that's going on, the lack of computers, like even like the shape of cars and whatnot.
Interesting. Well,
and like the shape, the modernism of buildings. It couldn't possibly be the 50s.
If we're in the 60s, though, it's the 60s where electricity is, because they actually make a mention. They're like, oh my God, his car has gas. Like, they like.
Oh, did they actually mention that?
I think they do. I could be mistaken, but like they're like, no. There's another comment about gas. Where
I'm pretty sure it's technically France, because of like you see phone numbers. Like I stopped an image of like the massive chart, and there's like phone numbers at the top right-hand side, and they're written in the European fashion. The license plates are all European style.
This was definitely done like,
which is really crazy, because
France,
like it was done for France. It was done in English first. Like it's an English movie done for France. And then they made a French version, or they added the French voices. But like it was an American director. You know what I mean? So.
But he didn't. He stayed faithful to like if the music, which is all, it's again beautiful, like,
right?
Just amazing.
It's another one of my notes. Do you remember the music? Because that music is great. It's a combination of Hans Zimmer and Camille, and they just blend perfectly together.
Yeah, it's American French blend, like sort of French roast.
This is a good time to pull out the negative review. And even though I have one of these for every episode, because this was hard to find, admittedly, someone who had a real problem with this movie. It seemed to be a problem that a lot of people actually had, though. The ones that had the problem.
It really bothered him.
Yeah. This is by him, her, or
really
him. Actually, I have no idea if Leslie's a guy or a girl, to be honest with you. So, Leslie Felperin from The Hollywood Reporter. At heart, this film's biggest flaw is that it doesn't seem to have any faith in its audience's emotional intelligence. It effectively neuters all the original story's elusive, poetic, melancholy qualities by spelling things out in capital letters, from the way it keeps making the little girl ask literal-minded questions about the physics of the little prince's world to constantly reiterating the filmmaker's message. And just to underscore their lack of faith in getting the ideas across of this mid-century work of whimsy and despair, there's a big old action sequence gussied up for the last act.
I totally agree with everything she says.
Well, like,
this movie's terrible.
Well, let's talk about that last act, because there's also, I mean, I don't think we're spoiling anything really. I mean, we're talking, this is tough because at the same exact time, go watch The Little Prince.
We've already spoiled so much.
I guess so. I mean, we haven't really, there isn't much else there's nothing really to spoil in this movie is what it actually comes down to. There's no real big twist. It's just a lot of good, solid scenes. You know what I mean? And they're all surprising in of themselves, but they start off surprising from the very beginning. So I don't think we could spoil it the same way you traditionally spoil a twist ending. But that sequence, I was totally into this movie, like 100%. Like, this movie's great, until we got to the magical realism. And I was like, I'm not so sure about this.
So my first watch through, it didn't feel right. I agreed that it felt out of place. But consecutive watch throughs, I started to look for not just like the very ham-fisted, like, oh, the king is now the elevator man, and like those connections where those things were important to them, whether, you know, it was a request when something was favorable or whatever, and pulling that into this.
They seemed like good ideas to write on a whiteboard, and then they went through with them, as opposed to like...
No, so I don't look at it that way. So I think, so the way I look at the third act after watching it several times again is that it basically, like you even heard her say it. She's like, what if he's old? What if he's like all this stuff? And like she's panicking. And so this is her coming to terms with what if the little prince grew up? And that was what happened. Like that was that scene. That was what would the world be like if businessman took over and the little prince grew up and forgot? What was that like, and how do we bring it back? And so that was her pulling back the little prince and pulling all whatever this nonsensical, delirious information was to make sense for her. So I look at it as it is a little bit of an action romp thing. She's flying the plane, which she, I hope, not doing in real life, because that would be really bad. But so I look at it from that perspective, as opposed to saying like, oh, it was this, you know, ham-fisted director's way. I felt like that was the childlike part of the movie, where it's just like, oh, it's adventure, let's do it, let's make it right. And I am imagining, because later at the end, she brings the little prince to the aviator, and she's going through this while she's just taping it together as she's trying to make sense of this. It's twisted. It's depressing. It's sad. It's really tough stuff for an adult to handle. Never mind however old girl that was. And I don't look at that scene as an excuse for action, and I look at it as a little girl trying to make sense of what like the realism of what the aviator's been telling her. Is like, I'm not always going to be around. She's like, what are you talking about? Like she didn't get it. And then I feel like that was her trying to make sense of it.
Yeah.
While she pieced together
I feel like there's like this really strange age where like a kid would understand that this is a dream sequence, but like they would want to be told somehow by the filmmaker, like directly, oh, it's a dream. Like they're, you know.
Well, is that spelling it out then? Like, is that
Yeah, I know
extra
that's really
spelling it
funny
out?
because that actually becomes really spelling it out. You know, like I personally, I prefer it as being like a. It's really weird because at the same exact time, you almost kind of want just someone to say, "Hey, guess what, guys? A dream sequence."
No,
you know,
because you get it.
Like,
because
I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's just there's a section of my mind where it's just like, you know, this would like finish things if I was told that, but then I would hate it. You know
exactly.
what I mean?
And it took me a second watch through to be like, oh my god, she wasn't going on this weird adventure, because that's how you're trying to make sense of it in the moment. You're like, is this really happening?
Yeah.
Like, is this what's happening now? Like, did she actually figure out how to start his plane and go on this crazy adventure to find the prince and make it literal? And it's like, no, she was taping together his pages.
Real quick, because we're running out of time. Mark Osborne happens to say that part of his influence and his thought process when going into this is he loves Miyazaki movies. So specifically, he happened to mention My Neighbor Totoro when talking about how he approached The Little Prince. I was wondering if you actually saw any of that. I don't know if you've seen My Neighbor Totoro specifically. I'm pretty sure you've seen Spirited Away.
Yeah, no, I can see that, but it's less. I feel like Miyazaki, maybe that's the one example in that scene where it's a little bit more blended, whereas Miyazaki is very. It's very hard to pinpoint and be like, oh, what is the real spirits? What is the real, like, what is the real world? And what does that mean?
There's obvious surface analogies to be made, something along the lines of like, oh, he chose a little girl specifically, and she's in like this fantastic realm that she comes across, the magical fantasy world, and that the girl is thought of as being more realistic than her environment is. Miyazaki draws his little girls as scrawny and like not, you know, kind of. Not like perfect little girls. Like she's not Peter Pan's Wendy.
Yeah.
Like where she just comes off as, you know, beautiful for her age. You know what I mean? That she comes off as kind of like this like misfit.
I don't even take it as that, but that's interesting take. Yeah. I don't know. I can see him being. Yeah, I mean, who wouldn't be inspired by Miyazaki films?
I mean, it's not hard to be inspired by Miyazaki films.
but as far as a direct allegory or connection to that beyond the way, I mean, even the frame story as a thing is very clear cut. It's not this amorphous thing that Miyazaki pulls off so well. Yeah,
unfortunately, we're going to have to call this a day because unfortunately we're out of time. Thank you for coming along. Do you want to promote anything? Are you working on anything right now that?
So I'm not working on it yet, but I'm going to be working on the new season for Say Hello to Blackjack.
Oh, well, yeah. I wasn't going to push that one on you. I pushed that one on John. I was like, John, talk about Say Hello to Blackjack.
Well, I'm the real main character when you think about it. So, no. At the moment, no.
Okay, well, that's cool.
Thanks for having me on.
No, that's no problem. It was great having you on, Joe. This is an excellent movie. Thank you for bringing it with us.
Yeah.
Thank you for showing up. If you like this video, like it, subscribe to our channel. We're on YouTube. We're also going to be on HaverCommunityTV.org. It's been a pleasure having you over. Thanks for watching, and take care.